Today, we're talking about a controversial topic: false accusations of sexual assault. This show will include discussion of sexual assault that could be upsetting for some viewers. After generations of women were blamed for being victims of sexual assault, the pendulum has swung. A new movement to believe all women or start from believing says that we should take victims at the word and that false accusations of sexual assault are rare. How rare are they? Today's guest, criminal defense lawyer Joseph Neuberger, will share his experience with this topic, as well as his perspective on what false allegations do to our justice system, what the current zeitgeist of believe victims means for the presumption of innocence, and the role of defense counsel. This conversation may be controversial, and I want to reiterate that the experience of victims is real and terrible. But what can we learn about the role of the criminal justice system when false allegations do occur? And what are the impact of those allegations on the falsely accused? Joseph, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. So let's talk about how common it actually is for false allegations to happen. Is there any information that we have on that?
Yeah, so there's no reliable statistical data. There's no one who really wants to tackle tracking false accusations. And the other thing you can imagine is courts are somewhat reluctant to call out an accusation as truly false. In some instances, you'll have a client be declared not guilty in such a way that you know they are factually innocent. And those sort of decisions are rare, but it's because of the nervousness about how we have to deal with these cases. But it's not rare. And in my practice, I'm seeing it in at least 50% of the cases we're handling.
Now, there's obviously, as you kind of alluded to, a difference between a false or a fabricated allegation and one that simply can't be proved. So are you saying that we actually don't have any way of knowing how many are actually fabricated, but that you do see that in your practice?
Yeah, so that's a very good distinction. So I do see in my practice cases at the end of the day that we can determine based on solid points of evidence that the accusation itself is false, that the evidence is made up and fabricated. And that would amount in our cases to be at least 50 to 60% of what we defend. Now, I specialize in this, so I get a disproportionate amount of clients in this area. You might find this to be about 8, 9, or 10% of the cases in the system now, but that is still very statistically significant.
Now, there's a current movement of believe all victims, believe all women, or start from believing. And look, Joseph, I get it. As I said in the opening, there have been generations of women who were not believed or who were blamed for being sexually assaulted. And, this movement might be a cultural one. But to what extent do you think that this cultural movement has actually had an impact on the justice system and on the presumption of innocence?
So that's a very good point here. So there has been a very good maturation or evolution in the criminal justice system over the last 2 decades, where victims of domestic and sexual violence are recognized, their rights are protected, they're handled in special ways in court, and there are legitimate cases that need to be prosecuted and people need to be found guilty for it. That said, I find it disturbing that we would start any investigation from a point where you absolutely at face value believe any complainant. Because in all cases where you investigate, I don't think we should have a different standard of investigation depending upon the gender or the nature of the offense. I think it's very important to try and start from an open mind, gather as much evidence, and that adds to the integrity of the system. So starting from a point of view where we believe every allegation can diminish the quality of investigations, the quality of the evidence that's presented, and therefore can have a disproportionate impact on people who are truly innocent, and that can lead to wrongful convictions.
Now, we've got about a minute left in this segment, but do you think that this movement of believe victims, if it is actually only certain types of victims, and you kind of mentioned domestic assault victims and sexual assault victims who traditionally were or historically have not been believed, but is this movement in other areas of criminal law, or is it really about the nature of the crime?
It really is the gender and the nature of the crime. So it's domestic and sexual offenses. That's where we see this ethos which has developed. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't disbelieve the complainant once you interview them, but that doesn't mean you presume guilt. You have to work through the process. And I've seen often interviewing officers right at the face value have made this distinction,
Mm.
and that has really caused, an improper or skewed investigation.